We're now on Daf Tzadi Yomid Beis, and we're up to Toshma. Just see where we got up to. Should be about halfway down. Oh no, we are approximately 10 lines down from the top. Toshma. Now, once again, just to remind ourselves, we're trying to prove Rav Chizda's premise that Yesh Koach B'Yad Chachamim Lakar Dovrim in Torah B'Kuv V'Aseh. Again, if it was a Shevi Al Taseh, then even Rabbah agrees. Everybody agrees unanimously, and we had a whole list of cases that we discussed yesterday. The last of which was Shofar when Rosh Hashanah coincides with Shabbos, and Mishum Zera the Rabbah. We enacted that we will not blow the shofar, but that's called kuvas. That's called shevi altas. So that's a case or a category of cases where everybody agrees that the chachamim are authorized to remove a mitzvah and tell you to remain passive. Whereas Rav Chizda went a step further, and he said that yesh koach b'yad chacham lakar dovet afilu b'kuvas. And they could turn truma into chulin, according to Rav Chizda. They could take a child who's not a mamzer according to the Torah law, and make that child into a mamzer, which means the child will now be able to marry a mamzeret. So that's how far Rav Chizda goes with koach b'yad chachamim. And now the Gemara is going to try to prove that Rav Chizda is correct. Bitlo mevuto, divrei Rebbe. Now, here's what's going on. You have halacha of gerushin. A man divorces his wife by writing a get and delivering the get to the isha. The Torah says v'nosan b'yada. However, he might be on the other side of the world, and he can appoint a shliach as his agent, a proxy, to deliver the get to his wife. That's valid. Now, the shliach is on the way. He's on his merry road. And the Baal has a second wind, a second thought about divorcing his wife. He changes his mind, and he walks into Beis Din locally, in his location, and he's mavatel the get. The problem is, again, they didn't have the same kind of communications and technology that we have in this day. The shliach, who's well on his way, he has no way of knowing that the Baal was mavatel the get, nor does the Isha have any knowledge of the fact that the get, which now by the shliach is going to be delivered to her, was canceled. That's called bittul, by the husband. And she naively or innocently accepts the get, and then she goes ahead and gets married to someone else, thinking that she's a grusha. Little does she know that the husband, after he had already delivered the get into the hands of the shliach, he walked into a Beis Din, and he was mavatel the get. And I'm not sure if this is a Mishnah or a Bryce. I'm pretty sure it's a Mishnah. Aleph, Gitin Lamed Gimel. I'm almost sure this is a Mishnah. Askins, I mean, quotes the first opinion as Mevuta. Now, the Baal should be taught and fed. Why? Because of what's called the Takonas Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel made an enactment that you are not allowed to be mavatel a get when it's in the hands of a shliach on the way to the isha, because the repercussions could be absolutely catastrophic. This Joe violated the takon of Rabbi Gamliel, but nevertheless, the Torah recognizes his bittul, and the get is worthless. like it or not. The Rabbanan can tell a person that he's enjoined from doing so, but they can't undo his bittul because the get is but. Now, you might ask, how does bittul work? How does it operate? What does it mean that I have a get that was written lishma with all the requirements, signed by two Eidim, and I make a declaration it's batel? I mean, chametz is batel. If I'm avat, my chametz Ramban is working very hard to understand how you can be vatel the chametz, and he says because chametz is not really yours anyway. Sisuri ano, snevam sheina b'shus saladam. So there's something called bittul. But how does bittul work in a get? So if I remember correctly from my younger years, learning in Rav Soloveitchik's class, he said that lishma in get is not just halacha in the ksiva that the sofer writing the get has to have in mind lishma, but it's a halacha that takes you from ksiva all the way till v'nasan biyad. The lishma has to be chal in this get from A to B to C to Z. And lishma can only be meaningful with what's called sivui habal. The Baal has to command the sofer to write the get for his gerushin. That's called, I appoint you. What's the word I want to use? Not appoint. I delegate you as writing the get on my behalf. You are delegated to that responsibility, to that job of writing the get for me because I've decided that I want this get to be a get. But that lishma is not a one-time occurrence at the beginning of the ksiva of the get, and now the get is considered lishma irrevocably. No. The status of lishma is an ongoing status that has to take this get from its inception and its ksiva all the way to the nesina. If at any point in between the Baal decides that he doesn't want to divorce his wife, he has removed his tzivui habal, we could call it his ratzon habal, his will, from gerushin, and is no longer lishma. He can actually strip the get of its chalos lishma. Lishma is a legal entity, a conceptual entity, and the lishma, so to speak, rides over the get and surrounds the get as long as the Baal has not changed his mind. In fact, if the Baal goes crazy, that's called ochso kurdaikus, it could be that the lishma is completely gone because he cannot continue engendering lishma if he doesn't have his marbles. And even if he regains his marbles at some point before the get is delivered, there may be a serious problem with the get. Don, are you raising your hand? I don't know. This could be, Zoom is not always reliable. I see a hand, but that, anyway. So the Tanakama of this Mishnah, which is Rebbe, is of the opinion that despite the fact that this Baal deserves to be tarred and feathered, he has violated the takana from Gamliel, requiring bittul b'fanav, meaning that you cannot be mavatal the get after the shliach is on his way. You've got to do it face to face in front of the shliach, so he absolutely realizes that the tzivui habal is gone and the get is possible. But nevertheless, according to Rebbe, the bittul is viable in a negative sense. You know, usually when we say the word viable, we mean it creates a chalos. Here, it's undoing the status of the get. It's mevatel the chalos l'shma in the get. the get that was delivered by the shliach to the isha is not worth the paper it's written on. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Eino Yachol, Lo Levatlo, Lo Lahosem Al Tno. The whole purpose, the goal of the Takana of Rav Gamliel was to avoid a catastrophic situation where she has no clue that what she's getting is not a get, and she goes in and gets married and has children who are mamzerim. Says Rav Shimon Gamliel, Ma koach bezdin yofa. Imkain, meaning if you're right, Rebbe, that the bittul is chal and the get is worthless, then the chachamim gained absolutely nothing. Well, I shouldn't say absolutely nothing, but hardly anything, by instituting their enactment that the bittul has to take place in front of the shliach. Because if you're telling me that b'di'evet, the bittul is valid despite the absence of the shliach, then the chachamim messed up really bad here. They did not achieve their goal. We're trying to protect this woman and her, hopefully fully, future children from this catastrophic situation. And therefore, says Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, maybe he's, in a sense, waving the flag of his father, thinking what his father would say in this case, Rabbi Gamliel. Says Rabbi Shimon, his bittul is not a bittul. The get is chal. And when she receives that get, she's megureshes, and she can marry another man. Otherwise, imkein ma koach bezdin yof. Says Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you have not gained a thing. You're still in the blotter, in the mud. And she will receive a get, and she has no reason in the world to suspect that this get has been invalidated. Back to Gemara. For Hacham in the Raisa Batel get, no one would deny that the bittul is recognized and is chal on a Doraisa level, which means the get is not worth anything. Because Sharidon Eshes Ishli Alma, and you're going to allow a woman who receives a get that's worthless and make believe she received the get, and you're going to be matir her based on this get to marry another man, that's already kuvaseh. That's already yesh koach chachamim lakar dorim and Torah kuvaseh to create a get, which is not a get. The Torah doesn't recognize this as a get. He was mevatel the get. This is a clear-cut support for a chizda that the extent and the scope, the parameters of the koach of chachamim is even lakar dover min haTorah. And the Gemara rejects. Because marriage is a whole different situation. I always give the example. I don't know if this means anything to anybody. In the Goyish Welt, there's something called annulment. You can annul a marriage. There really is no parallel in Allah. You can't really annul a marriage. Once the kedushin is chal, the only way of removing her status as nishasish is either the Baal is gishtar b'nebach, he dies, or he gives her a get. However, there is one concept in Allah that we're about to learn, which is vaguely similar, and on an external level could be compared to annulment, but it's not really annulment. It really operates midin t'nai. T'nai means that if a man marries a woman on condition that, etc., and the condition was not fulfilled, the marriage is gone. It's not really an annulment of marriage, because bittul of a t'nai completely destroys the maisa. The maisa kedushin is not viable because the conditions that he, the Makadesh, set were not met, and that's going to be the underlying logic of Rav Shimon Gamliel. Namely, whenever a man gets married, he adds a condition to his marriage, and that is that the Rabbanim, the rabbis, will be satisfied with the marriage. And that is called Kiddas Moshe V'Yisrael. And I'm sure you all remember that the Masechet Kiddushin will be very careful to hear the words from the Makadesh, etc., Kiddas Moshe V'Yisrael. According to the religion of Moshe, Moshe represents Torah Shebechsav, the Yisrael is Torah Shemal Peh, and that's called Kol the Makadesh, Adaite the Rabbanan Makadesh. And therefore, Afkeinu Rabbanan L'Kiddusha Minei, the Rabbanan can decide that they're not satisfied with this marriage. And the Pella is, the man has been married for 20, he's been married for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Not sure if he was happily married, but at some point he gave a get to his wife. And now you're going to tell me that the Rabbanan, 50 years after his marriage, he's already celebrated his, what do they call it, the golden anniversary? What's it called? And now the Rabbanan are going to tell me that for the last 50 years, he's been living in sin with his wife. And again, he's a chassid with bud and payas, but he's been living with sin. Why? Because the original condition in the marriage of Kol the Mekadesh Adaiti Rabbanan Mekadesh was never fulfilled, because the Rabbanan got up 50 years later and they decide we don't want this marriage. Why don't we want this marriage? Because we want this woman who in all innocence believes that she received a kosher get, the get is not worth it. We want to allow her to get married, or if she went ahead and got married, we want to allow recognizing the validity of that marriage, the kashrus of marriage, the kashrus of the children that are born from that marriage. And how do we do so? By telling you that the original marriage to our first husband was not worth anything. It was null and void. Afkeinu Rabbanan L'Kiddusha Minei. They could be mafkia the Kiddusha. As you and I know, pointing this out as a footnote, there are many situations in which we would like to break up a marriage because of a guna, a woman is stuck and we don't know the whereabouts of her husband. And there are many, many scenarios that would motivate us to want to let this woman get married, but we can't do so because she doesn't have a get. So there was one rabbi, I'm not going to mention his name, maybe you know his name if you date back to the years of my childhood, and he wanted to use this Gemara that we're learning now in those situations of Nebuch, a woman who's stuck in a marriage and can't get out of the marriage, to activate the principle of Afkeinu Rabbanan L'Kiddusha, and to completely nullify the marriage so that she was never married to begin with. And my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik, very rarely did he ever do such. He called together all the Rabbanim. He was the rabbi that presided over a body of about 1,000 rabbis in America called the Rabbinical Council of America. And he publicly, without mentioning the name of that rabbi, spent an entire shiur disproving and rejecting that approach. We cannot just simply say Kol Mekadesh and Afkeinu Rabbanan L'Kiddusha Minei. We are limited by those cases like the one we're studying now, according to Shmuel Gamliel, where the Gemara itself, the Talmud and the Poskim, will activate and apply this principle of Afkein Rabban L'Kedushin. There's no hefker. It's not a carte blanche. We'll make up. There are situations, blah blah blah, and we'll be mafkir the kedusha. Now, that rabbi wanted to institute another possible solution to the problem, and he wanted to suggest that under certain circumstances, we're convinced that she would want to get a divorce. And perhaps we can set up a shliach. The rabbis could decide that this person will receive a get on her behalf, as if she had appointed him as her shliach. And that's called Zachin li'adam shelo b'fanav. That if I know under certain circumstances that it's beneficial for you, you would want me to operate as your agent, then I could become a self-appointed agent as if you had appointed. You familiar with that? And for example, this whole sugi b'mitzvah, let's say I find a lost object and I want to pick it up on your behalf. I found a diamond ring and it's hefker, let's say it's lost, no simonim. I want to pick it up for Steve. So the Gemara goes back and forth. Can I do so? Because it's chav lachrini. There are others who will lose as a result because they also want to get a shot at this diamond ring. But that's called zachin li'adam shelo b'fanav. So can we be zoche in a get on her behalf, knowing that she would want out of this marriage? And therefore it's for her benefit that we accept this. And once again, Rav Soloveitchik fought this type in there. Because the Gemara talks about a case of a woman who was married to what's called a mukashchin. It's really repulsive. He's got terrible boils all over his body. It looks as bad as the esrog that we went to today in Daf Yomi, also about chazis. I don't know if you ever saw a picture of an esrog that's possible because of chazis. It's like really repulsive. And the Gemara says, no. She'd rather be married to this mukashchin than be unmarried, than be single. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Bereshis. After the Eitz Hadas, God bestowed a curse on Chava, Elishech Chukasech. Does that ring any bell? And the Gemara says, Tav l'meitan tavdu v'l'meitan armu. She'd rather be married to somebody than be unmarried. And this rabbi said, that doesn't apply today. Maybe the women of yesteryear, in the sociology of those days, would be desperate to be married. But today, women, they're independent. They earn tons of money, more than the men in many cases. I know a woman who's a psychiatrist. She makes, I think it's $500 a pop, just to listen to the woes of somebody who's laying on a couch. You know what I mean? And then somebody once asked her, well, what did he say when he was laying on the couch? She said, who's listening? So women today are very independent, and this chazaka, this psychology, no longer applies. And therefore, we can appoint a shliach on behalf of a woman to accept her get, and zachin li'adam shelo b'fanav. She certainly would want out of this marriage under certain circumstances. And Rav Soloveitchik said, no. This halacha of tav l'meitan tanu is based on a pasuk in Chumash. It's a metaphysical curse that God cursed Chava, and that's what it is. We can't change the halacha. Ole Ravina or Ravashi Yotena to Kodesh Bekaspa, Kodesh Bebia, Maikul Mema. I understand full well, says Ravina, how the Chachamim could be Oker Kiddushin, they could undermine and invalidate the Kiddushin if he married her with Kesef, because we have a principle called Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker, and Bezdin is authorized to take your ownership, your possession, and be mafkir, and declare that it's ownerless, which invalidates the Kiddushin. But suppose he was Makadisha with Bia. That too is a valid Kiddushin Dorais. How could the Chachamim be Oker Kiddushay Bia? And the Gemara answers, Shavyu Rabbana lebilaso bilas nus. Now, by what authority can the Chachamim magically turn a bias ishus, a bias kiddushin, into a bias nus? As if to say he was living with her in sin. That's not true. He had a bia kiddas ukidin for the purpose of ishus, of creating a Jewish marriage. Today we avoid this because Abaye already says Layad Amanda Kodesh with Bia, but nevertheless, there's Kiddushay Bia. In the case of Yibum, that's all there is Kiddushay Bia. So many Rishonim reinterpret this Gemara. Don't take it literally. The Rabbanan can't turn a Bia of Ishus into Bias Nus. But the answer is that the Rabbanan are going to be Mafkia the Kiddushin because of his T'nai. The Makadesh had in mind Kiddas Moshe Yisrael. And when the Rabbanan disapprove of the marriage, then they undermine the Kiddushin, and the Mela is Bias of Bias Nus. Not that they changed his Bia and the nature of his Bia from a Bias Ishus and a Bias Kiddushin to a Bias Nus. That's just a repercussion of the fact that the Chachamim exercised and activated their rights to be Mavatal the Kiddushin through Dinei T'nai, as if the condition to the marriage was not fulfilled because we, the Rabbanan, disapproved of the marriage. Once they disapprove of the marriage, and then you have Bittul T'nai, it's Memela, his Bia becomes a Bias Nus. In the Havamim, apparently the Gemara thought that H Kful, there's a limit. Can the Rabbanan do such a thing? Be Mafkia Kiddushin, and his Bia is now Bias Nus? That's a terrible thing. No one wants to be guilty when they go up to heaven of a Bias Nus. And the answer is, by golly, they can do it. And they will do it. Rather than allow this woman to receive a get which she is convinced is a perfectly reliable get, when in fact the Baal went ahead, he was Mavatal Shliach, Mavatal get, Shalom Shliach, violating the Takon of Rav Gamliel, we are going to say, Ma Koach Bezdin Yofen. Bezdin has the power to disapprove of the marriage, even if it means that the Makadesh was Makadesh with Bia, and we're going to convert his Bia into a Bias Nus, not directly, but indirectly, as a result of being Mafkia the Kiddush. The only thing I don't understand here in this Gemara, and we'll end now, is why did the Gemara have to raise the issue of Kiddush B'Bia? Even in the case of Kiddush B'Kesed, I would still raise the following objection. All right, Hefker Bezdin Hefker, but now you're going to turn all his bios for the last 50 years into bias nus? He's been living with this woman in sin? And the answer is yes. But the Gemara didn't have to go from one level to the other, from Kiddushay Kesed down to Kiddushay Bia. Even within Kiddushay Bia, we have this problem. Namely, you are transferring and transforming his Bia from a Bias Kiddushin Ishus into a Bias Nus. And therefore, I'm inclined to think that this Gemara should be interpreted in a whole different way. We're not talking about Bittul Atnai and Kedas Moshe Yisrael. We're talking about the Chachamim changing the nature of his Maaseh Kiddush. And the Gemara says, I understand in Kesef how they can do it because Hefker Bezin Hefker. And he's not giving her his money. But how can they change a Kiddushin, a Maaseh Kiddushin that was implemented with Bia into a Bia Snus? And the Gemara says they even have the right to do that. The question is how? How do they have the right to magically simply redefine the category of his Maaseh Bia? And instead of being a Bias Ishus for the sake of Kiddushin, it becomes a Bias. How do they have the ability to do so? And then let's just make a note of where we got up to, and the Mitzvah Hashem will continue this tomorrow. I wish you a great day.